If you really want to read about things like violence, you should consider Attack on Titan. That is quite the quote from Makoto Yukimura, the mangaka for Vinland Saga. Honestly, back when Vinland Saga's second season was announced, or actually back when Vinland Saga's first season ended, there was a lot of folks saying things like, that's it, the rest is a snore, and here comes Farmland Saga, and folks should just stop here. On and on and on, just almost implying this idea of a bait and switch that the series does. You come into it thinking Vikings, war, pillaging, bloodshed, all that kind of stuff, crazy action. And then you get Thorfinn farming for the rest of his life. And yes, I can honestly see a lot of the disappointment in certain people. Vikings is a huge lure. I mean, in the West, we're hitting on that really hard in Hollywood. There's a lot of Viking stuff out now. I mean, I watched Vikings. These epic tales of clans and bloodshed and pillaging and all this crazy stuff that people just eat up. But honestly, for me, it's not to say that every story about Vikings has to be about that. And so when everybody was doom and gloom about this second season and how it's just going to go downhill from here and that Thorfinn's never the same, I want old Thorfinn back, I was kind of accepting it. My mindset's always in the idea that I'm perfectly fine with the bait and switch as long as what I end up getting switched into, in the end, it in itself tells a good story. If everything before then has a purpose in the end. And I really do feel like so far after finishing the second season, I feel that. I feel like there's meaning to everything that Thorfinn's been through. You can't argue that his driving force right now is because of all of this. This had meaning. And yes, the spectacle of it, we see what burned and seared into his mind. Now granted, yes, for me, the second season wasn't a 10 out of 10 for me, but that wasn't about the story. I still love the portrayal and I love the characters. The characters are perfect. It was more so about the adaptation and how they directed the scenes. Some of the scenes were just dragging out way too long, and they added a bit too much original stuff to it. But that's all to open up to this recent interview on ANN, which I think was a really interesting look into the mind of Makoto Yukimura. This struggle that he's facing personally with the fandom itself. Yes, focused in on that aspect of that bait and switch, what everybody expects from Vinland Saga, but what they're actually getting. And yes, for the manga fans, they're already experiencing this, but for the anime onlys, we're just now learning about that with the second season. And you can imagine that the broader audience that the anime is getting is obviously going to bring new eyeballs into this criticism. But yes, Anime News Network met up with Yukimura at San Diego Comic-Con and they did a quick interview. They go on by asking what was the importance of contrasting Thorfinn and Canute. Both had father-father figures in their life who raised them in different ways. Ragnar as opposed to Thors. Yukimura replies, "It's probably because I saw that I wouldn't be only thinking about Thorfinn. To balance out my way of thinking, as well as a storyteller, it was really easy to resonate and connect to the series' main character. The main character's philosophy, the cause of action, and their causes become the most heroic, definitive thing. I actually feel this happening to me. To counter this, I created Canute. It was a reminder to myself to realize there are people out there who think differently than me, because this is a diverse world." Very fascinating, and I think we'll get more into that as this interview goes on, which is not a long interview, but it seems to be an ongoing theme. This idea of his own mindset changing around violence itself, and realizing as he's writing that he's getting a little bit too far in this direction, he still wants to create that balance. I think there is an importance of creating balance. There is a lot of writers out there, there's a lot of directors and creators out there that they want to say a message, and that's not a bad thing. If they feel very passionate about this thing and they're creative, why not create something that says something that you kind of believe in? I want to tell this message to the world. And he felt like he was getting too far in this direction with Thorfinn, and so he's creating Canute to sort of be that counterbalance, which honestly for me was like the biggest shift of the story. And personally, I'm still struggling with that as I'm watching the show. Canute was never about war. He was this peaceful boy. Those feelings kind of instilled upon him by Ragnar. This is not what he wanted. But I think the bigger picture really is in these two individuals seeing the same goal, but different ways of getting to it. And I do like that balance, because there's going to be a lot of people that will believe in Canute's way of doing things. You can't just run away like Thorfinn. You can't just run and find some peaceful area. You have to claim it. And that's what Canute's doing. But it also breathes life into the world itself, realizing that not everybody's going to think the same way as Thorfinn. Not everybody's going to think the same way as Canute. The world is full of so many individuals that feel like the way to the goal is different, and they're not always going to agree. Now, you could argue that how things kind of transpire at the end of the second season, it's almost that acceptance between the characters themselves that's the case. Aiden goes on to ask, similarly, war is a cycle as well. Thorkel has a penchant for violence and fighting, so much so you would call him a child at heart. Why did you decide not to portray him as simply evil, and for him to be a very enjoyable character? Yukimura replies, there are two main reasons that the character Thorkel had been born. The main reason is that I hate violence. Again, if you're reading Vinland Saga for violence, go somewhere else. To write a violent character, I tend to write him off as a bad guy. Though, part of me thinks that it's not fair. To maintain the balance, I created a lovable, violent character like Thorkel. Another reason Thorkel represents a childlike person is that I have this sense that violent person is ultimately a child. Ouch. I want to express how childish they are for being violent, even if they are a powerful ruler of the country or someone who thinks with an analytical, tactical thinking. Bold statement. Which again, I think goes to the core of this writer. This is sort of giving me a very clear picture as to how this mangaka thinks. They are not writing this story for the sake of saying, yeah, let's do it. Even though a lot of the shots and a lot of the panels even that I have read just show so much detail and brutality. I think it's for the sake of saying how unpleasant it is. And I do like that aspect of that's what Thorkel is. And I do love what he's saying here about Thorkel, because yes, that's technically true. He is sort of this big oaf. He just wants to fight. And yes, he's almost comical in that sense. I think that first fight that we had, Thorfinn versus Thorkel, I thought that, like, this almost feels cartoonish. Thorkel almost feels like a cartoon character. He's over the top. It's just bizarre, this idea of this guy picking up a massive log. Because he was portraying him as this child, that all he can think about is this one thing. And trying to keep him controlled is almost impossible because he's just a big, massive child. But it's funny for him to say that even that aside, like, let's put Thorkel aside, he still feels like anybody that wants violence is a child. Which, yes, in a sense, is sort of true. This idea of, say, somebody that's a dictator. They want to go out and they want to take out all these lands. They want control. I want. It's basically a child. I want all these things for myself. And I don't care what it hurts. I don't care what I take from people. I don't care if they'll suffer because I'm taking their land. I want. And I need this. And I don't care what your feelings are. It's almost childish. And that's how he views the characters in the story itself. And it goes on to say, you've mentioned in previous interviews that you dislike violence. The title of the series is Vinland Saga. In the beginning, Leif Erikson describes Vinland as a new world without war or slavery. What would you like to tell readers who are deeply interested in just the violence within the manga? And here it is. Here is the quote. If you're into my story for the violent aspect of it, at some point, I might not be able to meet your expectations. He's being honest. I respect that. If you really want to read about things like violence, you should consider Attack on Titan. Just go over there. There's lots of violence over there. That's what they're doing, which again, I think is a respectful thing. He's literally saying, this is what I'm doing. If you want that, that's kind of what they're doing over here. So just go read that. Perfectly fine. Don't have that expectation I'm going to deliver this to you. He goes on to say, I actually do hear comments about fans saying that they like Thorfinn from back in the day. Quote, what happened to him? He's only farming. I hear their complaints though. At the same time, I cannot help it. Sorry. I would argue that I like the new Thorfinn more than the old Thorfinn. Was there actually people out there that like the old Thorfinn? Seriously? The whiny kid that constantly just wants to fight? No, I didn't care much for him. I mean, there was sides of him that I liked, and I understood his frustration. I understood his driving force and the sorrow that he was going through, but can you honestly say that at the end of the second season, at least, you're not like more sold on Thorfinn as a character? And he's still able to step up when he needs to step up, and I think that's cool. Thorfinn's a fantastic character, more so now than ever. The amount of development and build around Thorfinn at the end of the second season is 1,000,000 times more percent than that first season. The first season, he's like minuscule. But again, it all goes into what was your expectations? Did you want the cool dual-wielding Thorfinn that jumps over people's heads and slices? Or do you want to see a character grow? And as he puts it, no longer be a child, and grow up. Which I don't technically blame people for having the expectations and almost feeling it's being taken away from them. But this is kind of that sad state of, I think, the shonen sphere in general. This idea that I just need violence to entertain me. Which is perfectly fine. Just don't get mad when the storyteller themselves isn't actually, their aim isn't that. What is so wrong with not having Thorfinn constantly killing things every single chapter? What's so wrong with him being his own character and being a human being that wants to move on with his life? and doesn't want this. It's almost that difficulty that a lot of people face whenever their storyteller doesn't do what they want them to do. It's like that whole situation we had here recently with Zom 100. Everybody wanted them to do this. The mangaka's gotta do this. And if the mangaka doesn't do this, I'm mad. Don't expect Yukimura to want Thorfinn to be a dual-wielding, bratty kid that kills a bunch of people. It's not what he wants to do with the character. And what's so wrong with that? I feel bad that he's even apologizing. But again, maybe he feels like himself that I create this expectation. And I'm not following that expectation. Like, was he supposed to put like an excerpt at the end of the first chapter that says, hey, just to let you know, eventually, this isn't going to be what you're looking at. But again, I don't really know what happens beyond the second season. It could still continue this seed of violence. But I sort of still expect it to be present, because this is something that you just don't escape. This is the time period. Kingdoms constantly at each other's throats, and yes, the Vikings still present. Aiden goes on to say, Vinland Saga has a nuanced approach to storytelling, involving important themes for teenagers who will grow into adults. Many people start reading shonen manga when they are young, which can be more violent, and they may later read your manga. Since fans all over the world read this series, what lesson would you like them to learn from Vinland Saga? Yukimura replies, even if the government told me to go to war, I do not want to go to war, even if I have to go to jail. I wouldn't want to yield to that, and would rather not hold a gun. If everybody on this planet had the same way of thinking, being against violence, even under the threat from the government or those in power, we would never have war. I wish. I think, unless you're making money off the war, I think most everybody is going to agree. I wish. My hope is to have the younger generation share this kind of value in the future, so there wouldn't be war in this entire world. This is the one wish I have. As an optimistic person, this is the only hope I want to express in my story, which I admire. Like I said, that's what I was mentioning earlier. At its core, you almost feel like this is a story that he wants to tell because he feels passionate about the idea that despite I'm going to portray this is all to say this. I mean, some people can make arguments that the idea that he has violence in his manga is a sign that he does play off that, or that he is drawing in people to bait and switch them. He's trying to show people, I don't like this, but here it is, and then people find that hypocritical. But again, you can't understand Thorfinn as a character and how he grows if you don't see what he's seen. You can't understand Canute unless you see what he's doing. If it just cut forward and said Thorfinn went through a bunch of Viking wars and stuff and now he's doesn't like it, you wouldn't even understand his character. You wouldn't believe it. You have to see that trauma in order to grow from it. Aiden goes on to say, this year will mark your 24th anniversary since you made your manga debut in 1999 with Planetus. You talked about how you like seeing growth in a character, but how do you view your growth as a manga author? Yukimura replied, I think my art has gotten better. When I look back at my older work, I get embarrassed looking at it. Story-wise, I'm proud of the fact that I took time to write a story that takes a while to understand. In a sense, I think my patience grew. I don't know if it's personal growth or not, but I'm more relaxed than before, which I think is just all the power to him. I think that's excellent. But again, that kind of plays into this whole aspect of Vinland Saga itself. This is that sign that he is wanting to build into a story, and it's going to take some time, and that narrative is going to shift. Like I joked about earlier, and it pretty much is self-fulfilling right here, is that idea of you would not believe Thorfinn's character if in the first chapter, in the first page, it says, violence happened, Thorfinn got sold off, and now he's farming, and he doesn't like what he did before. You wouldn't understand his character. This is that sign that he had that patience to build his character. I mean, that's what a lot of people are saying, that literally the first season was a prologue. Proof in the pudding right there. His story needed that much time to build Thorfinn's character. And yes, he's still going to have massive growth, I'm sure, going forward. But that was this pinnacle point in his life. His life got flipped upside down. He was living with his family. At some point, Doris goes out. He goes out with him. And everything is destroyed at that point. And he gets dragged through the mud for so long before he finally goes, I'm an adult, and this is how I view life, and I don't want to do this anymore. Which again, many will claim is a bait and switch, and they're frustrated by that. And again, I can't necessarily say I blame them for that. This was their expectations, and it didn't do that. But in the end, that's what the author wants to do. And I'm not going to argue with him if that's the choice that he wants to make. It's his story. It's his characters. And like I said with the whole Zom 100 things, that's his choice. Yes, you could stop reading it. Yes, you can put it down. Yes, you could say, I don't like this anymore. It's perfectly fine. If you were just looking for a bunch of Vikings to kill each other page after page, go look for that. Go on, as he says, go read Attack on Titan. That's not his goal. His goal was this journey, the Vinland Saga. And there's a side of me that kind of thinks, if you read Vinland Saga and you keep seeing reference to Vinland and you're expecting this to be a story about people killing each other constantly, isn't that sort of where you missed the beat? I don't know. But yeah, like I said, really cool interview. I know that a lot of people out there probably get this perspective often, but I just found this to be kind of interesting, more the fact that we just finished season 2 and we have more people than ever to kind of jump out there and say, what was that? What was season 2? What did I just watch? But I think it all was for Thorfinn, Einar as well, Canute. But I think it was a really fantastic shift. And again, technically my perspective of this whole thing is that, yes, I do like stories like the Western TV series Vikings. I like that. It was a cool series. Super violent and everything. But I don't need every Viking story to be about that. I don't need every Viking story to be about pillaging and killing and war and all this warring that was happening in that area at the time. I don't need that story told over and over again. If I can suddenly get a story about, what about this one guy right here? This big battle happening right here. What about this guy right here? What about this guy over here that was a part of this village that was pillaged? And now he's with that guy. And he wants to just get away from it. Why not? I'm all for it. That feels very unique. I'm all for it. I'm on board. Let's see where it goes. Hopefully if we ever get a 3rd season. Otherwise, I'll have to read the manga. Anyhow, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, if you did, make sure to hit that like button down below. Comment. Let me know what you thought about this whole interview. Additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe button to get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Just if you want to support the channel more, I have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, membership button down below. Greatly appreciate everybody does, and y'all take care.